Okay, thank you, Kinanaskum Tinawao, Madam Ambassador, for sharing those insightful perspectives on the important relationship between the EU and Canada. And what that means as the world transitions to net zero and global economies adjust. You know, as she was speaking, I was thinking of the word kinship, right? When we hear terminology like competitiveness, cooperation, you know, it takes me to a place of looking at my own community in this world that I come from, where, you know, we look at the relationship among all things. And, you know, I think that's one of the key things in this journey that we're all on together, is being able to work together in a good way. So thank you so much for your words. It's now time for our first panel, Industrial Competitiveness on the Way to Net Zero. So please welcome our moderator, Dale Bugin, Executive Vice President of the Canadian Climate Institute. And let's remember to scan the Slido QR code. Just flip your little tag over or check your email. And then we will look over to our code. Is our Slido slide coming up? No? Oh, and here's Dale.
Thanks so much, Jordan. I'd like to welcome our industrial panel to the stage, please. So I'll give you the quick intro. We have Yvette Vera Perez, the President and CEO of the Canadian Hydrogen Association. We have Adam Auer, the President and CEO of the Cement Association of Canada. Come on up, both of you. And online, we have the Président et Chef de la Direction de l'Association de l'Aluminium de Canada, Jean Simard. He's joining us virtually. Jean's going to appear on the screen behind us, I believe. Thanks so much for joining us. I mean, we're right to the heart of the issue today. We're talking about competitiveness. We're talking about carbon competitiveness. How better to start than with industry? The drivers of prosperity both now and in the future as we move towards net zero, as the world moves towards net zero. So this is the right place to have the conversation. I'm excited to get into it with you all today. I want to set the stage a little bit by thinking about what we mean by carbon competitiveness. This is sort of a nebulous word that means different things to different people. The Climate Institute, along with partners at IESD and Clean Prosperity, are going to launch a new commission on carbon competitiveness next week, or in 2 weeks, I should say. And that is going to unpack what we really mean by carbon competitiveness and what we need to do as a country to deliver it and protect it and ensure it. The commission really thinks of carbon competitiveness in 4 parts. It is about reducing emissions, not just to deliver on targets, but because as the world moves towards net zero, that is what international markets are increasingly asking for, increasingly prioritizing. At the same time, it's about maintaining market share and maintaining economic activity here in Canada and not merely shifting it to jurisdictions with weaker policy. It's about attracting investment to grow those sectors and new sectors. This week, the next steps in the Canadian Green and Transition Taxonomy was announced in Toronto. That's one more tool to pull investment in to those growing sectors. And finally, it's about growing new sources of economic activity. It's about new sources of growth as well as existing sources of growth, all of which can be compatible with net zero. So I'm really excited to talk to you all about this today. Let's get into it. I'm going to start us off with a quick little roundtable to get things going. So for you and for your sector, what's the biggest risk that comes to mind when we talk about carbon competitiveness? Go for it,
sure.
Please.
Sure. Thanks. Well, first of all, if that's okay, thanks for having me. And it's great to see you again, and great to see everyone here. So for the hydrogen sector, I would say more than commitments or thresholds or figures is the uncertainty. So to make investment decisions, you want that long-term view and understanding of what the future is going to look like. uncertainty, I would say.
Very good. Adam?
Cliche but true. Uncertainty is I think the biggest thing that we worry about. Now, it's uncertainty both. We're obviously very aware of the uncertainty that's being generated by the political narrative around the robustness of some of the climate policies that exist today. But there's also a larger uncertainty about where the market is going and whether the market will move in lockstep with the investments that different industries are prepared to make in decarbonization.
And Jean?
Can you hear me well?
We've got you, yep.
Okay, so I would certainly agree with uncertainty, but I would add also asymmetry in the fact that we are an export country. Aluminium is an export industry, and on the markets where we export, there is no carbon pricing yet. So this asymmetry requires protection domestically up and until the time where there is carbon pricing mechanisms that level the playing field for us on our markets, export markets.
We're going to get into that exact question in a minute, I think, Jean. Let's bring the audience into this conversation a little bit. We have a few Slido polls to pull up, and we'll unpack the answers a little bit. Can we put the first question up on the stage? And you can participate in this poll with your phones, participating in the QR code. So the first question is really, what comes to mind when we're thinking about carbon competitiveness? You've gotten a taste from our panelists about what they think about. What does it mean to you? We'll let that marinate a little bit, and we'll pull up the minutes. Pull it up in a minute. Let me unpack some of the details with you specifically. Adam, let's go to you. John raised this point too, but part of competitiveness is about defense. It's about maintaining what we have, even as we're implementing policy to drive towards net zero. Talk to me a bit about the Cement Association's perspective, how you think about both reducing emissions and protecting competitiveness here in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, that's the primary preoccupation for sure when we think about the link between decarbonization and competitiveness for an emissions-intensive and trade-exposed sector like cement. And I think your opening sort of framing of what does competitiveness actually mean is important. So, my answer to the question kind of has to look at it from two elevations, if you will. From the bird's eye view, we're, large, globally traded multinational companies for the most part in the cement industry. And we have investors that are worried about our carbon intensity, right? There's a risk there that is definitely seen in the market. And so our ability to attract capital and to continue to invest in our sector, to modernize, is definitely hinging to a larger degree on our ability to show that we have a robust and credible path to decarbonization. So that train has sort of left the station, which I think is very positive. But when you translate that down to the production level, it becomes a little bit different kind of dynamic. Yes, we're looking now, when we look to make investments in specific facilities in specific regions around the world, we're looking at the traditional kind of metrics. Is the market strong? Is there a robust supply chain? Do we have access to skilled labor? But also, is there an environment that supports our decarbonization journey? And I think that's where things get tricky, right? Because what does that environment look like, in terms of balancing the incentive to decarbonize with the pressures that Jean has already articulated? And to me, it's really about a reconciliation between the cost of production and the market's valuation of that environmental attribute of decarbonization. So if you have a market that's interested in decarbonization, willing to preferentially purchase low carbon materials or even potentially pay a little bit more for low carbon materials, that's obviously very positive in terms of driving capital investment in producing those materials. Similarly, if you have a market that is sheltered from actors outside of that regulated system that might want to compete with you on cost and not face the same pressures on decarbonization, then that creates a competitiveness challenge, right? So unfortunately for cement and for aluminum and other large industries, we're an undifferentiated commodity. The market is not willing to pay more money for decarbonized cement, and there's an army of producers outside of Canada that have low cost of production, high carbon, who can outcompete us in domestic markets. So from the industrial decarbonization system, I think the good news story is there's lots of levers that we can turn to sort of restore that balance, right? So on carbon pricing, you can moderate the stringency or the overall impact of that system on costs in a way that reduces those competitiveness risks. And to a large degree, I mean, there's been some exceptions, you know, that the provincial and federal systems that exist have tried to find that balance. You can help with capital costs by providing financing support. And again, here in Canada, we have this constellation of supports, the Net Zero Accelerator, tax credits, Canada Growth Fund, CIB, that are all trying to help on that front by, improving the sort of return on investment capital metric by providing some public support for those investments. The one area that we haven't done as well, which is going to become absolutely necessary if we're going to be ambitious on decarbonization and competitiveness, is to level the playing field in the market. Right? You can either do that at the border by imposing the same costs that domestic producers have on higher carbon imports, so that the competitive playing field is level, or at the same time, in addition, you also need to be looking at market development. So how can you regulate or provide incentives that require the market to ratchet up decarbonization as part of their, basically you have to buy decarbonized cement or decarbonized steel or aluminum. It doesn't matter where it comes from in the world. It's backstopped through regulation or through incentives. And that's the part where I think we still have quite a bit of work to do.
Yvette, let's go to you next, because competitiveness for carbon isn't just defense anymore. It's also offense. It's about the race towards these new growing sectors. In the Canadian context, you can't escape the Inflation Reduction Act in the US as being a big part of that conversation, and so is hydrogen. So talk to me about how hydrogen is competing for new market share for clean, green, and blue hydrogen.
Yeah, thanks. August 16th, 2022, that's when IRA was launched. And since that day, I think that we talk about IRA every single day. It's really important. It should be coming in effect end of this year. What I always say, the best offensive for us in Canada is being a first mover. So we have all the details of the clean technology ITC, the clean hydrogen ITC, and the other ITCs have already been provided. We really need the forms out and the companies filing in their projects. First mover is really important in the context of attracting those investments into the country. As we know, supply chains are challenged since COVID, and we don't seem to get recovered yet. So those projects to get to the finish line when it comes to contracting, to get into FID, final investment decisions, those will be the first one. Putting those purchase orders for those electrolyzers, all these systems, right? And therefore, they'll be the first ones to launch. So speed is crucial. And getting to starting deploying our own investment tax credits before IRA is in effect. And IRA is fantastic, but it's when you look at the nitty-gritty and the fine print and the details of it, it's not without complexities, right? So we can win by being more agile, given that we cannot really win on how much dollars we put into the system, right? That would not be feasible. For us. So speed is one, and being very strategic and very nimble and very agile. So looking at all the different policies that we have, and then look at how they play together with each other, how they elevate each other, as opposed to sometimes work at cross purposes unintentionally, right? So we have the clean electricity regulation. That's great because that stipulates that grids should be net zero by 2035. That means that all those projects, whatever the carbon intensity is today, they will be getting to a lower carbon intensity over time, right? So that's great. So how do we think about the existing policies and then CFR, Clean Fuels Regulation, for example, and how do we think and then what's next? how do we incentivize the end users so that we can bridge that differential in cost for the time being between production and an offtake. So those are some ideas that come to mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jean, let's go to you. La compétitivité du carbone pourrait être différente à court terme et à long terme.
Carbon competitivity could be different long term and short term.
Compétitif dans les deux?
Can aluminum be competitive in both long term and short term? And what is the position of Canada there?
We find ourselves in a very competitive position right now in Canada in terms of aluminum industry exporting to world markets. When you compare the pathway, the net zero pathway of the global industry, which is probably at 15 tons right now and aiming at zero by 2050, Canada's aluminum industry is at 2 tons versus the world average of 15. We are today where the rest of the pack is aiming to be in 2045. Our quest, our challenge is not energy transition. It's a race to the moon. It's developing and implementing and in scaling up a never yet done breakthrough technology, the inert anode. So I think that Canada has a double play. It's asymmetrical in terms of energy supply. So you have at the two ends hydroelectricity, and in the heart of Canada, in the heartland, you have access to oil and gas. Our challenge in Quebec, in the large industrial sectors, is not an energy transition, it's an industrial transition. So we have a powerful play today because of a natural competitive advantage, which is hydro. The challenge is to remain ahead of the pack while the pack is moving closer. So let me just share numbers with you. The most recent numbers from the International Aluminium Institute show that in 2022, for the first time in the history of our global industry, while there was an increase in world production, there was a decrease in overall world emissions in the industry. So it's the beginning of a decoupling within our industrial sector. This is brought about by new capacity coming on that has more modern technology, more efficient technology. There is fuel switching. As of this year, 50% of the aluminum production capacity out of China is renewables based, and it's growing. So the advantage that we have today is diminishing in terms of carbon advantage as we move through time towards the 2050 gate. So on the long term, our challenge to stay ahead is to invest massively to develop and deploy this breakthrough technology. What we are lacking is the proper fiscal or policy environment to take us through there, because it's very capital intensive and it's very risky. So we have to de-risk, demonstrate, scale up, and deploy in time to remain competitive while not losing market share. It's a major challenge, and it is a major challenge for policymakers, because you have to make available through a time window credits, income tax credits, and other tools that you don't know when they will be called upon to be implemented. So you lock in access to capital over a given period of time, and therefore this funding cannot be deployed in a foreseeable fashion in time. It will be called upon at some point in time, but you don't know when. So it's a major challenge for policymakers, it's a major challenge for us, and it's a very highly risky environment.
Let's pull up the first Slido poll results to see how the audience aligns or not with what we heard from our panelists. So the question again was, what do we think about when we're thinking of competitiveness? We see some echoes there, I think, in terms of innovation, solving uncertainty, some solution space like border adjustments. That is I think, a helpful scene setter for us. I want to start to turn to solutions. Let's pull the next Slido poll up, please, the next question. And I'm going to ask the same question roughly of the audience. So one of the things that intersects all of these questions, all of these dimensions of competitiveness, is industrial carbon pricing. This is a system that has been designed to deliver incentives to reduce emissions while also protecting and growing competitiveness. We asked our audience about what parts of industrial carbon pricing matters most. Panelists, how about you? How important is industrial carbon pricing in Canada for competitiveness for you and for your sectors?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been instrumental in driving some of the investments that we've already seen in decarbonization in Canada. Like on pricing, even though we sort of have, for heavy emitters in particular, a relatively gentle on-ramp into the industrial pricing ecosystem, it can help make some of those projects that are sort of on the cusp of investable. It can sort of tip the balance, particularly when supported with the revenue recycling and those types of investment to make certain types of projects go. So we've seen investments in fuel switching, we've seen investments in grinding capacity that allows us to make lower carbon cement formulations. And what it can't do at the moment is really buttress investment in the large transformational stuff that Jean just talked about. We have, for the cement industry, it would be carbon capture and storage, for example. We're talking about capital costs that far exceed anything that carbon pricing alone can currently support, and which needs a fairly rich ecosystem of other sort of public financing supports to make work. I think the challenge that we face now around this conversation around competitiveness and carbon pricing is, the stringency is increasing. All of our benchmarks are declining. The price is going up at the same time. And the challenge now becomes, can our investments in decarbonization keep up with that level of stringency? Or are we starting to face those pressures where we're eroding our competitiveness relative to higher carbon producers outside of that compliance mechanism? And, I think that pinch point is going to be different for different sectors. For cement, it's not going to be the same as it's going to be for steel, for aluminum. And that's where things get really complicated. The design of these systems was initially, we create this basket of more exposed sectors, and we will provide a sort of standard package of relief to prevent these carbon leakage effects from happening. I think as the stringency increases and the price goes up, we have to start asking much more difficult and complex questions about how to tailor that signal to the realities of different sectors.
Yvette, you want in?
Sure, yeah, very quickly. And in addition to Adam's point, it just reminds me, a few years ago, we had a program under the cap and trade system where we would fund greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects for industrial emitters. And I think that might have been when we met. There were a couple of really interesting cement projects and steel projects that we funded. But the interesting part of this, the scheme was that the revenues from the scheme, and you alluded to this, were recycled into projects. So revenues were used to fund these very projects that were reducing the carbon emissions, and I think that was really attractive. I would agree that, say for our members in our association, and it's not a mature industry as cement or aluminum, right? You could think of two types of companies or members: those who export hydrogen as a product, as a fuel; those who export their clean technologies. Electrolyzers, testing systems, etc. Thinking, for example, if you were going to export to Europe, Europe will have the CBAM, right? The cross-border, the carbon adjustment at the border. So if we look to export either a fuel or a product, and we don't comply with whichever mechanisms they impose, then the penalty is going to be on that side. So either carbon pricing or another mechanisms, the investment tax credit is one, but not without trouble, like John said, right? But we need to find a way of being competitive when we are looking to export our product in a more stringent carbon world. And how to get that done and be profitable, it's a very delicate balance.
Sean, how about you?
Well, I think that it's like a multi-layered chess game. So exporting into Europe with a CBAM generates even more value to the Canadian carbon pricing system, because if we don't have it, we're going to pay in Europe what we should be paying in Canada and growing the industry and the economy. That's number one. Number two is, again, we have different challenges depending on where we're born or located in the world as an industry. My competitor from the Middle East right now is switching, doing fuel switching, so going from natural gas, stranded capacity, to plugging on the grid and contracting solar power. They're not reducing emissions anywhere. It's just a market play. I have to, again, invest billions of dollars to develop a breakthrough technology to enable myself to reduce my footprint. So for them to shave off 90% of their footprint is a market play. For me to shave off my technological threshold footprint is not a market play. It's technological development. So we're in two different situations, and I think that we have to see carbon pricing mechanism in Canada, cap and trade in Quebec, the federal backstop as part of a toolkit that is not a one-size-fits-all or does all the job. You have to have enabling policies, both at the provincial and national levels, that keep getting us protecting our competitive edge as a responsible producer in world markets. Because Canada is all about exports. We're a resource country exporting to the world.
Okay, I want to pick up the cue that you've offered me. So you've all given some thoughts about how carbon price is part of the system. So take off your day job hats for me for a minute. You're no longer representatives of your members. Instead, you're doing my job. You're policy wonks looking to deliver policy that makes sense for Canada overall. So account for fiscal constraints, account for the fact that we need to reduce emissions and deliver on targets, account for the fact that, yes, we want to protect competitiveness at the same time. What are the policy planks that are missing from the conversation to help deliver outcomes for Canadian prosperity overall? Yvette, you want to start?
Sure. So I'm going to start by saying that when we speak about net zero, and this is a thought that came to me when I was listening to the earlier speakers, perfect is the enemy of the good. So the way net zero, I always say it's a dial, it's not a switch. So there are lots of very economically viable solutions that you could implement today that may not be zero carbon, but are helping you reduce carbon. I'm just going to cite one example, and that's dual fueling, right? In heavy-duty mobility, for example. So a new fuel cell hydrogen truck is about $750,000, give or take. There is a stimulus of $200K. It's still a pretty expensive truck, I would say. So if you're managing a fleet, if you're a municipality, and you have a mandate to lower your carbon footprint, you cannot afford to buy a fuel cell truck today. not to mention that you need to finish amortizing the trucks you already have, right? So what can you do? For example, I'm thinking in the context of hydrogen, dual fueling is something that you can implement today. It costs under 100K, and basically you inject hydrogen into your diesel. A 5 to 10% greenhouse gas reductions in your operations when you manage a fleet, that's a lot. However, that is not considered net zero, therefore there's a lot of incentives that do not apply to these types of technologies. Internal combustion engines are not considered net zero, therefore these incentives do not apply to them. So it is very important to get to have a North Star of net zero and to have a North Star of zero emissions, but you need to get there. And if on the way to getting there, you're not starting doing incremental steps and only expect the disruptive big step, then actually we don't get to net zero. So it's that notion that to get there, we are learning by doing, and we need to take incremental steps, and those steps are very valid as well.
We're running short on time, so I'm going to keep us moving. Jean, how about you? What's your policy advice?
So I'll pick up on what was just said. I think that the beach is very nice, but it's how you get to the beach. So basically, I think that Canada has an edge in terms of innovation, of technology development, because many of the hard-to-abate sectors are already anchored on clean renewable energy. So in terms of policy making, I would put a lot of efforts in technology, breakthrough technology and technological developments, ensuring that we patent, that we protect the intellectual property so that Canada benefits from it, and that we develop markets around the world that are trying to decarbonize, where we can push those technologies to decarbonize the rest of industries around the world. So it would be basically a play on clean technology development, the right policy environment, patent protection, which we've been shown to be very poor at in the past. So we have to develop a culture of protecting innovation and investing. Carry through, don't let the processes down halfway. We've also been very poor, very good at least at developing and letting go to foreign entities afterwards. So we have to put our money on winners as much as possible, build expertise, experience within government, in risk-taking environment, and follow through.
Adam?
Yeah, I would say very quickly my recommendations would be short term and then something a little bit longer term. In the short term, we're in a very unique environment where we've got the Inflation Reduction Act on the one hand, Green New Deal. In Europe, there's massive public spending going into the decarbonization space. Canada needs to show that it's at the table and make some fast and urgent decisions around big projects to demonstrate that we're serious and to show that we are committed to the level of ambition and innovation that's required in the longer term to get to net zero. In the longer term, we need to deal with this market challenge, supporting the market evolution to a point where the sustainable choice is the profitable choice. And to do that, we need to be doing much more around green procurement, around providing both incentives and regulatory backstops to ensure that decarbonization becomes locked into market decision-making, whether it's for building products like cement or for others. The problem with cement is it's not like an electric car or the digital music era where the product is much, much better consumer experience. For the consumer, it performs exactly the same. And so we need other instruments to create that market pull.
Okay, we started with risk. Let's finish with opportunities. In a word, how optimistic are you? How optimistic are you that we can deliver on our emissions goals, our competitiveness goals? Really quickly, like 10 seconds, Jean.
I'm not too optimistic at this point. I think there's too much political volatility in North America, both sides of the border, and we need previsibility in order to be able to move forward at the right pace. So I'm very doubtful.
Yvette?
I'm by nature a very positive person, but I would have to agree with John. I'm going to put it from the hydrogen perspective again. Hydrogen is not new. We've been at this for a very long time. Our legacy goes back to 1905 with the first electrolyzer patents being developed in Canada. Canada is an energy country, right? We have been an energy exporter for decades. The world has jumped into the hydrogen bandwagon finally now. So we need very bold, courageous leadership and get projects going, roll out. And I feel that we may be losing that edge. It's not an entitlement system. We have that leadership, we have that legacy, or we have had that leadership and legacy, and everybody's working very fast. So if we don't work at the fast pace that everybody's working, actually faster, we're going to lose that edge, and we're going to lose an opportunity to be a major player when it comes to hydrogen. Yeah.
Last word to you, Adam, and we'll clear off the stage.
I'm actually very optimistic. I think the arc of our future economy bends towards decarbonization. We have all the solutions. This is not actually, in most cases, a technological challenge. There are obviously some exceptions, but I am worried about the pace of how quickly we get there. I believe 100% we're going to get there, but how quickly depends on decisions that are being made now. Yeah.
Thanks so much, panel. Really appreciate your time and your insights and your expertise. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Wonderful. Thank you to our first group of panelists. So that was a great panel. Canadian firms must maintain and grow their carbon competitiveness so they can attract investment and protect their market share. Thank you for shedding some light on the best way to do this through well-designed climate policies that drive large emitter trading systems. And I was trying very hard, Adam, not to make a reference to the good mix of solutions that are really concrete in our mission forward. So, now, on a serious note, we have to take a quick break, okay? We're running a little behind time, so we need to take a quick break. You have time to take your bathroom break, get a quick snack or coffee, and then don't go too far away, because we'll be starting with our next keynote speaker, Michael Sabia, who's the CEO of Hydro-Quebec. So at 11 a.m. for all of our participants online, 11 a.m. we will start in a few minutes back up again. So enjoy your break, and thank you again to our panelists.